Let's imagine that the Muslims have arrived in Yathrib, they've arrived in Medina, and they've decided to build the mosque. Astaghfirullah, may Allah forgive me. Allahumma, I swear this is just to give the analogy for the example. The Sahaba have arrived in Yathrib and they've built Masjid Quba. And they've all worked together and they're all celebrating, Alhamdulillah, the first mosque of Islam. We're able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We found a haven. May Allah and His law always govern this land. May Allah always be supreme. May He be praised in this land. May the Prophet Muhammad succeed in his mission. May he be blessed in land. And suddenly they finish building Masjid Quba, and the Prophet Muhammad stands up and he says, this mosque is for those who want to pray and those who want to worship Allah. And I've brought belly dancers now in the other part of Medina. Those of you who wish to go and enjoy the belly. You're reacting already. I haven't even finished the example.
You're going to get smashed in the comments.
And he said that I've prepared belly dancers. And may Allah forgive you. I've prepared belly dancers. For those of you who wish to go, this is my vision 720 AD in order to build the economy so that I can become a strong nation, because I need the belly dancers and I need the twerking and the like in order to become a strong nation, so I can deliver the message of Islam and preserve the haven of Islam over here. Dilly, you're looking at me you're looking at me like you're so disgusted with it. But this is I'm just rephrasing exactly what you said to me.
The reason you're cringing and the viewer is cringing at the moment is because they cannot believe that the land of Mecca and Medina, in Jeddah, less than 100 kilometers away, these actors are performing and the like. You cringe at that because you think it is nothing in Islam, nothing in Islam that justifies an Islamic authority bringing somebody to twerk on the other side of the city and arguing and saying, at least people are going to Mecca and Medina, at least people are going to the masajid. What does it matter if I bring somebody to twerk?
But is he saying that though?
You cringe. No, that's what bin Salman's reforms are.
Yeah.
Now I'm not talking about the brother anymore. Okay. Now I'm talking about the reforms and those who argue that bin Salman is reforming Salafism or the like. The second point that is worth noting is when we look at how do you reform these ideas, how do you reform? You reform them through education and dialogue. Let me give you an example. Man goes to the Prophet, man goes to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala and says, I want to divorce my wife because I hate her. And Umar ibn Khattab turns around in front of the streets and yells out, he goes, look at these men of our generation. She gives him her body, she gives him children, she sacrifices her beauty, she looks after him, and then he suddenly gets bored of her and he wants to throw away. Well, shame on you men. And suddenly the man feels ashamed and he stays. He protects the institution of marriage through that dialogue, through that engagement. But the point here being is that Islam, and this is where I think sometimes that my criticism of Salafism is, in that Islam in and of itself is an empowering religion in that everybody is tasked with Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. We have no intercessor with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't have priests to tell us how to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why when an ordinary person says ittaqillah, we don't automatically tell the person to be quiet. We want to hear first why he's telling us ittaqillah, because we acknowledge that Allah has given him agency and capacity regardless of his status to be able to tell us ittaqillah. And the proof is that when Herakl, the Roman emperor, or I don't know the English version of it, but Heraclius, I think, when Heraclius says to Abu Sufyan, who are the people who follow the Prophet ﷺ, he said it's the lowest of our society. They are the ones who are saying ittaqillah. The point here being is that,
and he said those are the people that follow the Prophet.
Those are the people who follow the Prophet. And that's why Islam self-regulates itself. When we say that we criticize Salafism or we criticize the ideology in Saudi Arabia, what we are criticizing is we're saying we should move it within the framework of Islam to something that is more mainstream within the framework of Islam. What bin Salman is doing is taking it completely out of the framework of Islam and saying, I'm going to deal with Salafism by letting people enjoy the pleasures of the flesh, by letting people enjoy the rays, by letting people enjoy things that we consider to be un-Islamic. And instead of facilitating a debate about how to move the goalpost of Islam within the framework of Islam, I'm going to imprison the very scholars who might be able to advocate and help me advocate for the shift. People say the scholars might not be able to do it, but I tell you honestly, and this is heartbreaking for me, because I used to listen to him on a regular basis and I loved listening to him as a young person, Sheikh Salih al-Mghamsi. Sheikh Salih al-Mghamsi was lovely to listen to as Imam of Masjid Quba. But after being punished for his tweet where he called for the release of prisoners, he now celebrates bin Salman from the rooftops. Ayyad al-Qarni celebrates from the rooftops bin Salman as a result of the pressure that bin Salman has put. In other words, bin Salman is not facilitating, and this is where I push back on the premise, he's not facilitating a dialogue on the nature of Islam in Saudi Arabia. He's facilitating a dialogue on the restriction of the influence of Islam in Saudi Arabia. He's not arguing for a reformation in terms of how we interpret Islam. He's arguing for the containing of Islam within Mecca and Medina, because then you will be happy at least to see the Haramain, while the rest of Saudi Arabia, where there's no longer any broadcast of Taraweeh prayers, where the volumes now are significantly depleted with regards to adhan, where Quran is now banned in terms of using loudspeakers to recite the Quran, bin Salman is saying, I'm not getting rid of Islam, I'm just limiting where it is. Allah. And that's what bin Salman is arguing, in that yes, you can go to Mecca, yes, you can go to Medina, but I want the mosques outside Mecca and Medina to be quiet. I want to ramp up the volume of the raves. I want that to be all over TikTok and social media.
Isn't that your interpretation of things? Is it really that binary? Is he really saying that I want the loudspeakers and the masajid outside the haram, to be quiet, so these other things are made louder. And is it really this or that? Is it really this or that?
Okay, Dilly, I won't answer the question. Let's just go through, not very long. Bin Salman comes to power. He stands on top of the Kaaba. He invites Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj turns him down. He invites Mariah Carey for the concert. He's desperate for somebody. If it's not Nicki Minaj, who's very raunchy, my second choice is Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey is less old school, but she's willing to come. Then in the education curriculum, they used to spend 40 hours or 38 hours in the week, the students used to spend on subjects that were divided into 4: fiqh, Quran, Arabic, and the like. Now I'm going to merge them into one session and reduce the hours from 38 to 25 hours. And instead I'm going to use the rest of those hours for subjects of critical thinking. Because I think when they study fiqh and when they study whatever, they're not doing much critical thinking.
And
they
they become a bit more shadid, they stay shadid.
They stay shadid. So I'm going to reduce the hours. They don't need to study Arabic and Quran and this kind of thing. And even the Quran, some elements of it I'm going to remove from the education curriculum because I want to normalize ties with Israel and the like. I want to send that particular message. Then I'm going to announce a regulation that the loudspeakers of the volumes of the mosques should be 33% maximum for adhan. And then for the Quran, they should not be used for the recitation of Quran. People on the street shouldn't have to hear the Quran. If you want to hear the Quran, go to the mosque. Why do you need to hear it outside onto the streets? The Jum'ah khutbah shouldn't be used for the Jum'ah khutbah. Oh wait, the people outside couldn't hear the khutbah. Okay, allow it for the sermon, but not the Quran. I don't want the Quran to be heard on the streets. Let the khutbah hear, but not the Quran. A village chief comes and protests to the mayor and says to him, we're the only mosque in the village. Surely these rules don't apply to us. People need to hear the adhan. And they say, no, it applies to you as well. But those people won't hear us. It doesn't matter. 33%, that's the law, even if you're the only... Then he says, you know those imams, when you watch on social media from the mosque in Riyadh or the mosque in Dammam or these other imams that we discover on social media or the like, none of these imams may broadcast the Taraweeh prayers. I don't want people enjoying their voice in Riyadh and whatever. Besides, it's not even the Sunnah. Who broadcasts prayers anyway and the like? Oh, there's a backlash over Mecca Medina. Khalas, leave an exception for Mecca Medina, given that there's people like Dilly and Sami, they want to watch this Quran channel or the like. But everywhere else, in Riyadh and Quba and these places, Quba, where we discovered Muhammad Ayyub and the like, silence. No TikTok, no Facebook. Don't broadcast the beautiful recitation of the Quran that I listen to when I'm walking to work, and an ayah might come about that makes me reconcile with my wife or makes me reconcile. I don't want these beautiful voices here. Now Islam should be in the personal space. It doesn't need to be so public. Why does it need to be on social media? Why should it be outside of the mosque? So you look at all of these various different regulations that are taking place. I ask you, when you look at these regulations in whole, when you look at the Ramadan rules, for example, where it says, for example, no books may be approved except by the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. That sounds all very good. It sounds logical. It sounds fantastic. There was an imam in America who responded to me and said, it's sunnah, I don't see anything wrong. Then look at its implementation. An imam criticizes the raves by Turki al-Sheikh, sacked. An imam criticized another rave, sacked. An imam criticized the general entertainment policy, saying that it's ruining the youth of Saudi Arabia, sacked. You can't say these in the mosques. What the rule means, you can't say these in the mosques. When it says that keep the qunut short, keep the dua short, what that means is don't spend so long on the Palestine issue. Don't. Because Trump is Safir al-Salam, as Sudais said in Mecca. Trump is the ambassador of peace. We need to, etc. But it's okay because Dili Hussein, not you Dili, but it's okay because other imams are coming out and saying it's sunnah. I don't see anything wrong with this. When it says don't bring your kids, for example, for iftar in the mosque, why should kids be there in the first place for Taraweeh? They make noise and the like. Whereas the Turks on the one hand are saying that a mosque that doesn't have kids, fear for the future of the ummah. Why do you want to restrict kids? Because they disturb the worshippers? Ittaqillah, the people before you never did this. And kids were always at the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this is a response to those who said it's sunnah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have a hadith where he makes sajda. And Al-Hussein and Hassan jump on his back. And he doesn't get up from the sajda until Hassan and Hussein have got off his back, because he doesn't want to disturb them while they're playing on his back while he's in sujood. The fact it's a hadith means people saw him, and they saw him do it in the mosque. They saw him do it in Medina, which means the kids were playing in Medina. They were disturbing the prayer. They say, kids, I don't want them to disturb my prayer. They disturbed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, khairul khalq. And instead of telling them get out of the mosque and ban them from coming to the mosque, he said to them, let them play on top. And this is the reason why I say Bin Salman is not coming out and saying I'm getting rid of Islam. Bin Salman is doing with these, and that's, I got a lot of backlash on the Ramadan rules.
So did we.
And then you see, for example, how it's being implemented, and that's what, and I think part of the reason is this. And this is where I have a lot of sympathy for the brother who responded to me. And may Allah reward a lot of his work. He's done some fantastic work. I understand, because I speak to many of my Pakistani brothers, and they're like, no, surely not the Holy Land. No, it can't be happening in the Holy Land. No way. I just went to Umrah and I prayed behind. You know, Shuraim now has resigned. People say because he's not happy with what's happening. Another imam has recently been sacked. An imam in 2019 was put in prison because he gave a khutbah denouncing Turki al-Sheikh. But they say, no, please, I want to see the Kaaba in Medina. An imam once said to me, sent me a private message, where one of the most famous of, and I won't mention his name, sent me a message saying to me, Sami, barakallah fik for what you've done, but I want to go to Umrah and Hajj, I can't come out and support. of what you're saying in that. That's why I ask the Muslims, when you take it in terms of what's happening, the question here is this: should I wait until bin Salman bans the Taraweeh prayers? And by the way, I have it on very good authority. And nobody would believe me if I say this, but I'll say anyway, I have it very good authority, that the original draft of the banning of the broadcast of Taraweeh prayers included Mecca and Medina. And that bin Salman got cold feet at the last minute. And that the reason the Haramain took 48 hours to deny that they would be included in the ban was because the Saudis were monitoring the reaction and the backlash first.
And because there was a sizable backlash.
Because the sizable backlash, they decided, you know what, we'll leave it for all the other mosques. Because the Muslims are so frightened at the prospect of Mecca and Medina, they'll forget that we banned it all over Saudi Arabia. Think about it, Dilly. In less than 24 hours, bin Salman turned off the loudspeakers for Quran permanently in all of Saudi Arabia, all of the Bilad al-Haramain al-Sharifain, except Mecca and Medina. And you know what the Muslims did? We breathed a sigh of relief because it wasn't Mecca and Medina.
At least it was Mecca and Medina.
At least it wasn't Mecca and Medina. And that's why I think sometimes, honestly,
It literally was a sigh.
and that's why when you look at even now look at normalization of ties. When bin Salman calls Israel the occupier again, he's doing it because you, Dilly, are hosting these interviews. Because Muhammad Jalal is hosting the interviews. Because the people online, the Palestinians, are loudly shouting their cause. Because the Pakistanis are retweeting and sharing. Because the Bengalis are taking to the streets. And bin Salman is like, this is making me uncomfortable. I don't want to be seen on the wrong side of history. I'm going to declare them an occupation force. But I'll leave enough. I'll let the Saudi bots criticize Palestinians. Saudi bots are criticizing Palestinians, while the official statement is pro-Israel. That way, if the Palestinians win, I show the official statement. If the Palestinians lose, the bots, Netanyahu, I was always with you. Look, I gave the bots, which is why I thought it was very interesting. And this is something I didn't say on the Thinking Muslim podcast because it hadn't happened yet. But the one thing that's very interesting is that Erdogan's tweet, the official account, about his conversation with bin Salman, there's a paragraph which is very strange. We talked about the need for constructive statements to, I don't know if it's support Palestine or for de-escalation. The reason that's interesting because it suggests that maybe Erdogan said to bin Salman, you need to be more firmer in your statements in what you're saying. And then bin Salman, of course, called the Iranians as well just before I entered here to talk. It's almost to say, look, I'm willing to set aside my differences for the sake of Palestine, preparing the PR just in case, because public opinion matters. And the reason I mention all of that is because Dilly now ask me the question, at what point, therefore, should I oppose bin Salman's reforms? Should I wait until he bans the Taraweeh prayers in Mecca and Medina in the broadcast? Should I wait until he reduces the volumes in the Haramain? Should I wait until he imposes imams who will start making dua celebrating Turkey al-Sheikh? Should I wait until until the mosques start getting shut down in Saudi Arabia and the rest of Saudi Arabia, or perhaps they start getting more monitored? Should I wait until Ramadan practices are even more restricted? At what point should the Ummah turn around and say, Ya bin Salman, ittaqillah, what are you doing trying to invite Nicki Minaj? What are you doing inviting Haifa Wahbi? What are you doing inviting Sofia Vergara to Riyadh to strut her stuff in a Riyadh advert or the like? At what point, Dilly, and I ask the viewers, what point do you want me to turn around and say, Ya bin Salman, Ya Ummah, something is happening here that is dangerous and we need to start getting a grip on it? And I think that's the question that should be asked. And that, okay, the brother, I appreciate it. He's worried and he said it. I think it was related to me that he said, I haven't listened to the full hour and a half, but it was related to me that he said that I am damaging the stability of the country, and I've had phone calls like that. But Ibn Khaldun...
You asked another question.
But just on this point, but Ibn Khaldun said, oppression heralds the end of a dynasty. And here's why he said it. He didn't say it as a theoretical thing. He said it because what happens is when the state starts appropriating property, when it starts oppressing its people, what happens is that people start to leave the country. When they start leaving, the cities start to lose their population, which means the markets shrink, which means you have a brain drain, which means you're unable to achieve the very prosperity that you were set out to achieve in the first place.
Because your people are gone.
Because your people are gone. So when Allah says justice, He's not saying justice because it's a fancy concept. He's saying it because the opposite leads to the kharab al-umran, the destruction of a state. So when they say I'm harming the stability, here's the question. Am I harming the stability for calling out the oppression, or is the one doing the oppressing and driving people out Saudi Arabia and putting them in prison, is he the one harming the state? Given that now you see many Saudis leaving Saudi Arabia and going abroad, not because they don't like the raves, maybe some of them like the raves, but they don't want to be suffocated in Saudi Arabia. They want the freedom to be able to speak without going to prison or without the black jeep rolling up in front of their house. And that's why I think that we should put this into context. Bin Salman has been in power 7 years. Every year he introduces a new legislation. How long do you want me to wait before I say to people, ittaqillah?